Welcome everybody. This is the 7th lecture in my course on purification, ethics and karma in early Buddhist discourse. There has been a very lively discussion on the blog. I really enjoy it. I feel, at least for me, the blog is now becoming more interesting than the lecture itself. There were quite a number of comments on the passage about the Buddha's recollection of the first jhana, and this is a somewhat broad topic, and I like to go on that a little bit more in detail now. There was one Michael Bizert. He just, as he says, I would speculate that his jhana experience as a child was based on a past life experience. Yeah, I agree with that. That is a very meaningful suggestion. That is also the way how I would explain it. That in a past life, and we have several Jataka stories where we hear that the Buddha had been practicing jhanas in past lives, had been attaining the abhinya, super normal knowledges. And so it would, from that perspective, not be at all surprising if he, on being reborn as a human being this time from one of these past lives, he still had a residue of this ability, and as a small child therefore was able to get into the first jhana. Now, I like to look again at the passage I quoted last time, and I'm giving it now with a little more context. So allow me to read this for you. I considered, this is right after he has found ascetic practices don't lead him anywhere and just before he moves towards his awakening. I considered, I recall that when my father the Sakyan was occupied, while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Could that be the path to enlightenment? Then, following on that memory, came the realization, that is indeed the path to enlightenment. I thought, why am I afraid of a happiness that is separate from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? I am not afraid of a happiness that is separate from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. So when we read this in full, I think one point first of all becomes clear is that this passage does not indicate that this was the only time in his life that he had experienced a jhana before his awakening. It just says that he recalls this particular experience from his past. But this does not mean that he could not also have attained jhana at a later point in his life before becoming awakened. Then another point is that I also think is noteworthy, that the kind of description we get here of the first jhana, secluded from sensual pleasures, etc., accompanied by applied and sustained thought, etc., this is exactly the same description we get of any kind of first jhana anywhere else in the discourses. This is the first jhana, that description of anybody who gets awakened. This is the first jhana that the Buddha experienced as a small child or as a young man, we don't know exactly. And it is also the same description we find in the Brahmajala-sutta. It's the first discourse in the Digha Nikaya. I just give you the reference. And there it is jhana attained by non-Buddhists who hold the view of a self. They think that by attaining the first jhana, secluded from unwholesome pleasure, etc., etc., this is how the self attains supreme nirvana here and now. I think this is significant insofar as it shows us that jhana was attained by non-Buddhists, according to the Buddhist scriptures. And the whole Brahmajala-sutta, many of the views described there are based on jhana experiences. So one cannot, I fail to make sense of Brahmajala-sutta unless I assume that contemporary practitioners at Buddha's time were able to attain jhana. And the decisive difference is that they lack right view from a Buddhist perspective. And Danya Percy has posted something on the blog from Venerable Sujato, and I found that really helpful. I found he nicely puts things into perspective. According to this quote from Venerable Sujato, the attainment of jhanas under the teachers Alara, etc., would have been undertaken with a particular perspective on what it means to attain a jhana, some kind of self-theory. And that is, from a Buddhist perspective, wrong view. But a shift of perspective by way of implementing right view turns these same jhana experiences into tools for progress to awakening. Now, here's another passage I would like to bring in. This is after the Bodhisattva has been able to gain the same experience as his teacher, Alara Kalama, and later also as Udakarama Rama, the father of Udaka. And by Alara now he's being invited to become a co-teacher. And so he says, this Dhamma does not lead to disenchantment, but only to reappearance in the base of nothingness. The Pāli is akinchanya yatana upapattiya. That is the word normally used for rebirth. If this Dhamma, this teaching given by Alara Kalama and the corresponding meditative attainment, only lead to reappearance, being reborn in the base, in the sphere, in the realm that corresponds to nothingness, then it must have been the full-fledged attainment. It is not possible, according to early Buddhist meditation theory and cosmology, to do the same thing without jhana abilities. Therefore, I think in our attempts to understand the significance of the passage, the long passage I quoted above, as far as the texts allow us to judge, we have to assume that the Bodhisattva was able to attain jhanas, and that Alara Kalama and Udakarama Putta were able to attain jhanas in order to get into these immaterial attainments. Now, several participants have been considering the possibility in the blog that this early youth jhana experience might have been different from what he experienced later, or that what his teachers taught him might be different from the Buddhist type of jhana. As I already mentioned, now, as far as the texts allow us to tell, always the same description is found. And the discussion has also brought up the notion that there are different types of jhanas. Some are based on letting go, others are based on effort. And these comments reflect an ongoing discussion about what is the nature of jhana. And I felt that since the topic of jhana is not really on the course schedule in the near future, I thought it's worthwhile to spend a few minutes and just look at these things. Yeah, I'm going to touch on three main areas of contention in regard to jhanas, but before I start that, please, I am not presenting the only possible way of understanding. I'm not claiming this is the only truth, everybody else is wrong. This is the way how, based on whatever humble meditation experience I have and whatever humble understanding of the scriptures I have, this is what it looks like to me. This is just one way of seeing things, and you are completely free to just reject it and forget about it if you think it's not meaningful. There's basically three main areas of contention in regard to what it means to attain a jhana or not. One is thinking and jhana, is one able to think inside a jhana. One is sound and jhana. Is one able to hear sound when one is inside a jhana? And one is effort and jhana, effort and willpower. So the first of these, thinking and jhana, this is related to the first two jhana factors. In the quote that I have here on the blackboard, this is translated by applied and sustained thought. The Pali words are vitakka and vichara. And I have discussed this in some detail in my Satipatthana book on page 75, if you like to further read this up. The thing is that as far as I can see, vitakka and vichara have a broader meaning. So vitakka specifically is the point that we should look at now. Vitakka literally translated means thought, and it stands for conceptual thinking. And so specifically scholars have concluded that the first jhana then must be a state of happy reflection, if I'm allowed to call it like this. Now the problem is that, and you will find all the references in my Satipatthana book starting on page 75, if we look through the discourses, the way jhana is described, it does not seem to be just a state of happy reflection. And an interesting passage in the Mahachattarīsaka Sutta shows that vitakka has a broader meaning. It can also just mean the direction of the mind, giving the mind a certain direction. And this is basically an activity of the mind that can apply to speaking, just as I'm speaking to you now. It can apply to thinking, just when we sit somewhere alone and think something over, and it can also apply to deeper stages of meditation where conceptual reflection is pretty much absent. It's basically, you see, like my situation here now, I have here my notes, but I haven't fully formulated what I'm going to say. I have just, here it says, briefly explain vitakka and vichara. So this gives me a first direction of the mind. There is sort of like, now I would like to talk to the participants of my course about this topic. And there's a certain direction of my mind that I don't stray off into something else. And then there is vichara coming after and supplying all the words that I want to say. And I need both of these qualities. I need this sense of stirring in order not to just go blah, blah, blah off into something different. But I also need this supplying of the actual words that I'm now going to use as I'm talking to you. Otherwise, I'm going to get stuck in the middle. And this is how vitakka and vichara function in speech. And this is also how they function when we think something over. Some problem? So now we take time, we think, okay, now I have to think tomorrow this and this is going to happen, how I'm going to deal with it. And this is the vitakka, it gives this direction, tomorrow's problem, how to solve. It gives the main theme. And then the vichara goes, well, I could do like this, I could do like this. And sometimes it strays a little bit off course. It goes, I could do like this and could talk to this person. And hey, vitakka puts us back, hey, now is the time to think about this problem. And in meditation, specifically when we attain jhana, it becomes something similar. There is the mind which is pointing at the object. Usually when we are approaching jhana, for many meditators there is a so-called counterpart image, an nimitta, a light experience or something similar. There is something that is the object of our mind, and the mind has to be pointed at that. And then there is the need for that sustainment to keep with that object. Both of these are still gross mental activities, and they are left behind when we get into the second jhana. But they need not be conceptual. They need not be mental blah blah blah. That is on the first area of contention. I think I go through all three and then I give you time to go at me with questions and comments. Can one hear sounds while one is in jhana? This is much discussed among practitioners. Now there are two canonical passages to take into consideration for that. One is the Discourse. I give you the reference here. Hang on. Yeah, this Discourse says that for the attainment of the first absorption, sound is a thorn. And the whole context is about different thorns that are to be removed in order to get into absorption. Now, these two factors I've just been talking about, vitakka and vichara, are said to be a thorn for the second absorption. And by definition, the second absorption is free from vitakka and vichara, from, applied and sustained thought here in our translation. So this gives us a very strong passage. Gives us the idea that if sound is a thorn for the first jhana, it should not be present in it. Then there's another passage, and this is from the Vinaya. It's from the Uttari Manusa Dhamma Parajika, the rule concerning defeat about false claims to higher attainments. There is the monk Mahamoggallana. I think we will come to him a little later if I'm not going to get too talkative on this jhana topic. He says to other monks, look, I was sitting in the fourth jhana. He actually speaks about Anālayo Samadhi, the concentration of imperturbability, which is the fourth jhana. So look, I was in the Anālayo Samadhi and I could hear elephants plunging, making some noise. In the fourth jhana. Now the other monks go rushing up to the Buddha and says, oh, look here, Venerable Moggallana is claiming false attainments. This is interesting because it shows us very clearly that the other monks were of the opinion that this is impossible. Somebody who is in the fourth jhana cannot hear any sound. So if he says he does, he must be making a false claim to attainment. But the Buddha exonerates Venerable Moggallana. He says, no, it's possible. You know what happened? What seems to have happened is that Venerable Mahamoggallana quickly lost the fourth jhana, heard the sound, and then went back inside. And if we look at his description of his meditative development, we find that even for developing the lower jhanas, according to the Samyutta Nikaya description we have, he was not very clear. He was a very eminent and powerful meditator, but he did not have this analytical clarity that the discourses associate with Venerable Sariputta. And so it seems that he had not he did not himself realize that he had quickly emerged from the fourth jhana, heard this sound, and then gone back inside. Yeah, so here I like to give a little story. I've thought of a little simile. Now imagine you are walking together with me. We are somewhere in Sri Lanka. There's a historical ruins. We are visiting the historical ruins of some ancient Buddhist site. There's also one of these water tanks. They had these water tanks full of water. And as we are passing by the water tank, I suddenly slip and headlong I fall into the water. Splash! Anālayo completely inside the water. So first I was outside of the water as we were walking. Then I slip, I fall inside. You don't see me. Splash! Then a little while later I poke my head out. And I say, I can't get out of here. There's no steps or something. Can you ask the, what do you call them, the guardians or whatever, can you ask them to give me a ladder or a string or something? So you walk over to those guardians and tell them, look, the monk is in the water and he says, give him a ladder. No, the guardian is very clever. He says, no, what you're saying cannot be true. You see, if he is inside the water, he can't talk. Inside the water, he is not able to talk. If he opens his mouth, water will come inside. But if he can talk, he can't be inside the water, so he must be outside. No need for a ladder then, no? You see my point? When I am up to here in the water with the head outside, am I inside the water, am I outside the water? It's a little hard to say, no? You say, I'm inside, and I can argue, well, but he can talk, look, he can look around, how can he be inside the water? You say, I'm outside, woo, the whole body is wet, it's cold, I want to get out. So there's a question about subjective experience, and a question about somebody is attaining jhana and then is taking his or her experience as the mark. This is the way it is. And then on listening it's a little difficult to put all these things together. But I think there is considerable space if we see that subjective experiences and views can be different, and we do not cling too much to the words. Is Anālayo now inside the water? Is he outside the water? Is it either this, then he cannot? Is it like this, then he cannot? But just see that there is always a gray area. And so, coming back to this sound thing, putting these two passages together, one passage tells us sound is a thorn for the first jhana, the other one tells us even in the fourth jhana one is able to hear. But then we get this point that it's not precisely inside the fourth jhana. We might be able to develop some perspective on the discussion that is nowadays often going on these topics, that there is sometimes some gray area. 100% fully immersed in the water, 100% fully immersed in the first jhana, I think one does not hear sound. But there is this gray area where you poke your head above the water surface and you can talk and you can hear, and you just have to do a little loop and you're back all inside the water. And I think with that simile we might be able to appreciate that somebody might say it's impossible to hear sound in jhana, and somebody else might say it is possible. No, there are those who stand outside of that water tank and think they are inside. There are those who believe they have jhana, and as far as we are able to tell, they have not gotten any. So if somebody continuously hears sound and keeps thinking of this and that, then I think it's a little difficult to call this a jhana. But for somebody who has gotten into deeper concentration, there is quite a spectrum of subjective experience, and we need not nail it down to one particular definition. And then the third area of contention is regarding the role of effort and will. Now, here I first like to mention that cetana, mental volition or will, is part of nama, name and form. I give the reference here. Therefore, cetana is present in any state of mind. There is no such state of mind completely without cetana. So the question is not completely no cetana, but rather how much of it, how strong, how prominent we need cetana to be in the mind, this will. And here I like to just mention that according to the suttas, there are 4 different ways of getting into concentration. These are the 4 iddhipadas. And so according to this iddhipada teaching, there is a way of developing chanda samadhi through desire, virya samadhi through energy, chitta samadhi through the nature of the mind itself, and vimamsa samadhi through investigation. So again, the suttas are giving us a whole kaleidoscope of different possibilities of getting into concentration, and we need not say it's only like this. Only going by the nature of the mind is the only way, or only going by willpower, this is the only way. I think every one of us, every practitioner will find his or her own appropriate iddhipada, if I may call it so. But none of these needs to be wrong from the outset, and none of these needs to be necessarily related to views of self. And regarding the use of energy, there is a very beautiful simile that is being developed and used by Ajahn Brahmavangsu, a very outstanding meditation master and jhana master from Australia. It's a simile of the donkey and the carrot. So I steal it from him and quote it here because it's just too beautiful. There's a donkey, and in order to make that donkey move, people dangle a carrot in front of his mouth. And it's at a kind of stick, so the carrot is out there, and the monkey is always moving forwards because he wants to get to that carrot, but obviously with every step the donkey moves forward, the carrot also moves a step further. Now, what does the clever monkey do? The clever monkey. The clever donkey do? According to Ajahn Brahm, the clever donkey gets into real high speed. He runs very fast. And then at a certain moment he stops. So because of the speed of moving, the carrot is also moving. At the moment he stops, the carrot for a moment goes forward, goes even further away. But then he comes dangling back until the donkey, and he gets his carrot. And I think that's a extremely skillful simile for describing the use of effort in order to get into what is a condition of non-effort. In sum, every single jhana experience, even of one person attaining, will be different. The way one person attains will be different from the way another person attains and describes that. But it seems to me that the basic characteristics of jhana, the standard description we get in the discourses, and these three aspects of contention that I covered now, they seem to be pretty much applicable to all occurrences in the discourse as far as I can see, and I do not see any textual basis for assuming that there were basically different jhanas, that a Buddhist's jhana is in principle different from a giants didn't attain it, a Hindu jhana or a Christian jhana or whatever. I mean, the purpose to which these are put is different. There are different views behind that, but the nature and experience as such, its basic constituents, should be the same. Yeah, long talk on jhanas. Any comments or questions on this? You got all into jhana, I assume. Well, I try to wake you up again. There's a nice point made by Laura de Bernardi. She quotes the Dvedavitaka-sutta, Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 19, where the Buddha describes that before his awakening he divided his thought into two types, into wholesome and unwholesome. And then in regard to my presentation of the first jhana experience and the Buddha's understanding developed from that, she asks, am I right to say that the wholesome-unwholesome distinction is one that the Buddha was already working on? And do I take your comment to mean that it was only on the eve of his awakening that he joined this ethical distinction to the experience of pleasure? I think that puts it very nicely. The basic idea that there are certain thoughts which are unwholesome, like desire and hatred, that must have been part of the ancient Indian background. That it was known to other teachers that one should not be full of hate and not be full of sexual desire if one wants to get deeper meditation states. But that same ancient Indian background also believed that one has to shun pleasures as such. Pleasures is something bad if one is on the spiritual path. And so my understanding, the way I understand it, is that in this moment when the Buddha reflects on his past experience, he realizes that not all pleasures need to be shunned, but this distinction between wholesome and unwholesome can also be applied to pleasure, not only to thoughts, in the way described in the Dvedavitaka-sutta. And it is this, and Laura had already pointed it out, this is also what I see underlying the instructions in the Satipatthana-sutta on contemplation of feelings, where we get a very succinct instruction. 3 types of feelings are distinguished, and then these are differentiated into worldly and unworldly types. And this introduces an ethical distinction. Is this pleasant feeling a worldly type? Is it an unworldly type? Yeah. With his teachers, Alara, Kalama, and etc., I would expect that from their perspective, the pleasure of jhana was also something that one should better avoid, because one can get stuck in that pleasure. This is just my assumption. I have no textual basis for that. This is just my idea. That they were teaching the attainment of jhana, but urging people to move onward, to don't, there is pleasure there, but be careful, don't get attached to that pleasure, go on, get into the fourth, I mean, they were not using that terminology, but we use the Buddhist terminology, use the fourth jhana and then get into this immaterial attainments, pure equanimity, total, no limits, boundlessness, nothingness, etc. So they were seeing pleasure as, they must have been encouraging some degree of pleasure, otherwise one can't get into jhana at all. But I assume that they would not have given it any value in itself. And obviously when the Bodhisattva leaves these teachers behind and then goes for ascetic practices, the theme of avoiding pleasure becomes even stronger. And so my understanding is that at this point, he says, no, this is the path to awakening, and it is not necessary to be afraid of this pleasure, because this pleasure is a wholesome pleasure. And then from there he applies this wholesome, unwholesome distinction in a broader manner. Then he develops a recollection of his own past lives, seeing the passing away and reappearance of others. He sees on a personal, long-distance history level and on a universal level that this same principle is applicable throughout. And this is also, as far as I can see, the meaning of a passage in a sutta that had also been quoted on the blog, the Panchalachanda Sutta in Samyutta Nikaya. I just give the reference again if anybody likes to look him up, which says that the Buddha discovered jhana. You see, as I mentioned, the Brahmajala Sutta mentions jhana attainments by others. The Jatakas tells us of all kinds of past lives of the Buddha where he attained jhanas, and it seems there is too much textual evidence that speaks against the idea that there was no jhana whatsoever before the Buddha's time, and the Buddha is the one who discovered jhana as such. So, according to my understanding, again, this is just my view, the only way of understanding, or only way how I can make sense out of this passage is that he discovered the potential of jhana. Exactly what we are getting here in this passage. Could that be the path to enlightenment? That is indeed the path to enlightenment. And so, coming to the end of my jhana talk, it's getting more jhana talk than the Madhyama-āgama talk now, today. The basic thing is this distinction between wholesome and unwholesome, or skillful and unskillful, kusala and akusala. And that is actually the reason why I had brought up this passage. So, the happiness of jhana is kusala, it is wholesome and skillful because it takes us out of the happiness of sensuality. But once we are out of the pleasure of sensuality, eventually there comes a point where the pleasure of jhana will also be left behind. It's a gradual path. And we need stepping stones in between to get to the final goal. Yeah, again, I give a little time for comments or questions on this. Everybody still in jhana? Yeah, there's a comment on Madhyama-āgama 10 by Wanru. So she correlates the 7 ways of abandoning the taints with the threefold training, the morality, concentration, and wisdom, in a somewhat random and mixed match pattern. And she gives the correlations that number 1 is related to concentration and wisdom, number 2 to morality, number 3 to morality and wisdom, 4 to morality and wisdom, 5 to concentration and wisdom, 6 to wisdom, and 7 to wisdom. Let us look at them again. So in the Madhyama-āgama version we have the seeing, guarding, avoiding, using, enduring, removing, and attending. And I put the Pāli corresponding terms with their Pāli equivalents by the side, and then again the number. As you remember, I had told that one item has moved down in the list, but otherwise the list is fairly similar. And the basic points that these 7 activities are about. Let me see if I can get both. Yeah. The first, the seeing, is seeing the noble truths instead of engaging in empty speculation. The second was guarding the sense doors. The third was avoiding what is dangerous and unsuitable. The fourth was using things properly. The fifth was enduring various vicissitudes. The sixth was remove what is unwholesome. And the seventh was attending to the awakening factors. And I think we can make a correlation, and here Darshana Makavita has been faster than me. I always have these little things up my sleeves for the next time, and he always comes out with them before I can use them. He's very to the point. He's already noted some of them. Very good. So here is the correlations that I propose. Darshana and I agree on several points. Seeing the noble truths corresponds to the factor of right view of the Noble Eightfold Path. Guarding the sense doors, we can see that as an aspect of right effort. And for number 4, using things properly, these were actually the 4 requisites of a monk or a nun, and so for at least monastics, this is an aspect of right livelihood. And removing what is unwholesome is an implementation of right intention. And the awakening factors are found under contemplation of dharmas in each of the 3 canonical versions of the Satipatthana Sutta that we have. So this is right mindfulness. So we can see that even though we cannot match each of these 7, at least for several of them we can do a correlation with the Noble Eightfold Path. And so I think these 7 ways of dealing or countering the influxes or taints, the asavas, show us very practical possibilities of implementing several factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And I'm grateful to Wanru and to Darshana for having brought up this topic. Yeah, this is my somewhat extended review of the topic we covered during the last lecture. Again, I invite any question or comment. Well, then we go into the next topic. With this lecture, we are moving into the second chapter of the Madhyama-āgama, and the second chapter is explicitly said to be the chapter on karma. So after purification and ethics in the last 2 lectures, we are now getting into karma. Karma, the word karma just means action. And in Buddhism, as I have put here on the blackboard, it stands in specifically for ethically qualifiable action, and it is an affirmation of moral responsibility. There were several views held in ancient India according to the way that the texts record. And here I'm giving you some excerpts from the second discourse in the Digha Nikaya, the Asamanya-Phala-sutta. I quite on purpose do not give the names of the teachers to which these views are attributed, because in the parallel versions extant in Sanskrit and Chinese, the views and the teacher who holds them are different from the Pali. And even within the Pali tradition, we find some contradictions regarding to what teacher is holding what kind of view. So I think we can be quite certain that the texts agree and that these types of view were held by someone, but the precise name is something that is considerably more uncertain, and so we need not concentrate on that. So here comes the first view. If with a razor-sharp wheel one were to make this earth one single mass and heap of flesh, there would be no evil as a result of that, no evil would accrue. If one were to go along the south bank of the Ganges killing, etc., there would be no evil as a result of that, no evil would accrue. If one were to go along the north bank of the Ganges giving, there would be no merit as a result of that, no merit would accrue. So this view is in direct contrast to what Buddhism affirms. There is evil and its result, and there is doing of good things and the result of that. The next view I have is another denial of conditionality as such. There is no cause or condition for the defilement of beings. They are defiled without cause and condition. There is no cause or condition for the purification of beings. They are purified without cause and condition. Again, Buddhism definitely differs on that, and we will see this in not the next discourse we read, but the one after, or a little after we come to that topic. There is very clearly a cause and condition for why beings are defiled according to Buddhism, and there's also a cause while they are purified. And that here another one. There's nothing given. There's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. So this is another instance of this same view that denies karma and its effect. Here is a little longer view attributed to the teacher of the Jains, Nigantanatha Buddha. The Jains agree with the Buddhists that these views I cited previously are wrong, that there is cause and condition, there is retribution, but the Jaina conception is, according to what the texts tell us, somewhat more absolute than the Buddhist conception. So here we have a Buddhist report of these Jain views, which, as far as we are able to tell from Jain text, does not seem to be too inaccurate. There are some passages where the Buddhists present the Jains in a way which is not in accordance with Jain beliefs, but this seems to be more or less acceptable. So the Jain teacher is quoted to be telling to his disciples, "You have done evil actions in the past. Exhaust them with the performance of piercing austerities. When you are here now restrained in body, speech and mind, that is doing no evil actions for the future. So by annihilating with asceticism past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future. With no consequence in the future, there is the destruction of action." The main point that is important for us from this passage to be kept in mind is this idea that what has been done in the past has to be kind of eradicated. It has to be worked out by some form of asceticism. Now, Buddhism holds a view that not all that we experience is a result of karma. And there's a passage here. This is the Buddha speaking. I read the passage. Some feelings arise here originating from bile disorders, from phlegm, from wind disorders, from an imbalance of the three, produced by change of climate, produced by careless behavior, caused by assault, produced as the result of karma. See, karma is only one of the different causes listed in this passage for experiencing certain feelings, unpleasant feelings we can expect. The text continues, therefore, ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a view as this, whatever a person experiences, whether it be pleasant or painful, or neither pleasant nor painful, all that is caused by what was done in the past. They overshoot what one knows by oneself, and they overshoot what is considered to be true in the world. Therefore I say this is wrong on the part of those ascetics and Brahmins. I mean, just very simply said, not everything we experience is because of our past karma. Much is, but not everything. Yeah, regarding the Jain and Buddhist conception of karma, a distinct difference is also the emphasis on the mind in Buddhism. We have a discussion reported in another discourse, the Jivaka Sutta. I'll give you the reference again if anybody likes to look it up. Where the disciple of the Jains says that, I paraphrase a little bit, the most important is bodily restraint, bodily control, bodily action is the real important one, and verbal and mental action is not so important. And the Buddha comes back with the, at first sight, surprising argument, no, it's the opposite. Mind is the most important. And so the point is that for any bodily or verbal action, there needs to be the mental action behind it. And from this emphasis given to the mind as the principal motor, if I may call it so, of karmical activity, we get this famous dictum, passage number 4 here on the blackboard. Monks, I reckon intention, this is Cetana in Pāli, to be karma. Excuse me. Having intended, one does deeds by body, speech and mind. And this emphasis on intention is a very central aspect of the Buddhist conception of karma, and also of Buddhist ethics and the Buddhist theory of purification. In this passage I just quoted, it then continues to explain that what one has intentionally done gives results, and these results may happen in this life, in the next life, or at some later time. They are going to give results, however. And here I have another passage. Neither in the sky, nor in the middle of the ocean, nor on entering a mountain cave, nor elsewhere is there a place on earth standing on which one could escape the fruit of evil karma. I'm just going through all these different points and just throwing these different spotlights on the Buddhist conception of karma, and much of it will become clearer, if it is not clear now, as we keep reading those discourses on this topic. And another important spotlight I like to throw on karma is that it is perfectly compatible with the teaching on not self. And there is here a statement by a monk who did not get that point. So we have a look at what this monk says. He has heard the teaching on not self, and so he wonders, so it seems material form is not self, feeling is not self, perception is not self, formations are not self, consciousness is not self. What self then will actions done by the not self affect? The point of how can there be karmic retribution if there's no self? But the Buddha gives him a teaching on conditionality, I believe. The point for us basically is that not self does not mean nothing. Not self means there is no permanent self, no eternal self according to Buddhism. There is nothing that is unchanging, but there is something that is changing. There is a continuity, and dependent arising precisely explains how this continuity functions. And so, according to early Buddhism, there is no problem in explaining karmic retribution. It is not exactly 100% the same person that experiences the karmic retribution, because by the time retribution ripens, that person has become older or changed or even become reborn. But it is a continuity. I mean, it's a stupid example, but if somebody takes a loan and after 2 years he or she has to pay it back, then even though in those 2 years many things have changed and he or she has become older and maybe become divorced or got married or moved to another town or whatever, it is still he or she will have to pay that loan, and if they don't pay it, they will get into trouble. I mean, it's a very it's not a very particular profound simile, I know, but I just thought of trying to make it very simply. Yeah, then there is I should point out that in fact the situation of karma is much more complex than a simple loan, and to precisely calculate the fruit of karma is said to be anchinteya. It's beyond thinking. So the point for us is not to get into precise calculation, if I do like this, how much of this that I'll get, but to see the basic principle, the causality, conditions, and that we create the conditions for our own happiness and unhappiness. And it is because of this creating which makes us also hear, but also honor, and also capable of changing the situation. So there is this famous dictum here from the Loṇakaphala-sutta. Beings are owners of their actions, heirs of their actions. They originate from their actions, are bound to their actions, have their action as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes between beings. It distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. Action is kamma here. In the discourse, this Loṇakaphala-sutta gives very easily intelligible examples. It says like somebody who kills others will in future be short-lived, and somebody who hurts and harms others will in future be sick. Somebody who is angry will in future be ugly, and somebody who does not like to give to others will be poor himself or herself. This discourse, actually, when I did my comparative study of the Madhyama Nikaya, is the one with most parallels. I have a whole host of Chinese translations and translation in different languages. It seems that this topic of what do I have to do so that I can become beautiful next life and rich and happy, that was very, very interesting and a good topic for preaching. And in the Madhyama Nikaya, excuse me, in the Madhyama Nikaya, right away the next discourse, the Mahakama Vibhanga, explains that again, this is not absolutely deterministic. It says that somebody who does evil can still be reborn in heaven if, in addition to that evil, he or she does a lot of good things. And the other way around also. Somebody who does something good might still end up in hell if, apart from this good deed, he or she engages in evil actions. And this non-deterministic nature of the early Buddhist theory of karma is in fact the topic of the first discourse into which we are going to get now. So while I'll change here, I still give time for some questions or comments. As I said, this first overview of karma is not meant to be final, not expecting you to have gotten totally clear all these different aspects, but it's just a first overview. And as we go through the discourses in this chapter on karma, we will have time to look at these aspects one by one. I shouldn't have talked about jhana. Everybody's just meditating. No comments, no questions. I'll not talk about jhana anymore, I promise. So here we go into Madhyama-āgama 11, the discourse on the simile of parallel is the Loṇakaphala-sutta, 99th discourse among the threes of the Anguttara Nikaya. I read the Madhyama-āgama. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha was staying at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. At that time the Blessed One said to the monks, if one were to say, according to the actions a person does, he will experience the exactly corresponding result of those actions. Then, in that case, there could be no practice of the holy life and no attainment of the end of dukkha. I'm now here, I'm ... I'm leaving out the second statement. There is some translation problem in the Madhyama-āgama, and it gives two times exactly the same statement. That makes no sense. So I'm leaving that out just for you to know that there is a problem here, and I'm just glossing it over. So I continue with the discourse. Why so? Consider the case of a person who has done an unwholesome action and must experience dukkha as its fruit, by being reborn in hell as a result. Why must a person who has done an unwholesome action experience dukkha as its fruit, by being reborn in hell as a result? This is the case, when a person has not cultivated the body, has not cultivated virtue, has not cultivated the mind, has not cultivated wisdom, and his lifespan is very short. This is the case of a person who, having done unwholesome actions, must experience dukkha as the fruit, by being reborn in hell as a result. Now here we get a simile in the Chinese version. The Pali version has a different pattern. It gives the opposite case first and then comes out with the similes. I mentioned this earlier, I think. We often have this in the transmission that the discourse basically has the same stuff, the same pieces of teaching, but somehow the sequence is different, just moving up and down. So here we have right away the simile, and this is the simile that gives the name for the title of the discourse. It is just as if a person were to drop an ounce of salt into a small amount of water, intending to make the water salty and undrinkable. What do you think? Could this ounce of salt make that small amount of water salty and undrinkable? And the monks reply, Yes, indeed, Blessed One. And why so? Because there is much salt, but little water. Therefore the salt can make the water salty and undrinkable. Now we get the opposite case. Again, there's a person who has done an unwholesome action and must experience dukkha as its fruit by experiencing the result in this life. Why must a person who has done an unwholesome action experience dukkha as its fruit by experiencing the result in this life? This is the case when a person has cultivated the body, cultivated virtue, has cultivated the mind, has cultivated wisdom, and his lifespan is very long. This is the case of a person who, having done an unwholesome action, must experience dukkha as its fruit by experiencing the result in this life. Now we get the simile. Suppose a person were to drop an ounce of salt into the water of the Ganges, intending to make the water salty and undrinkable. What do you think? Could this ounce of salt cause the water of the Ganges to become salty and undrinkable? The monks replied, No, Blessed One. And why not? Because the water of the Ganges is much, while an ounce of salt is little. Therefore the salt cannot make the water salty and undrinkable. So we get the principle that, yes, the unwholesome action has its fruit, but the way how it will have its fruit depends on the context. And we have this simile of the same piece of salt thrown into a small amount of water or thrown into a vast amount of water has quite a different effect. Now we get some more similes, and I have abbreviated them a little bit so that it becomes not so tedious when I read it out. It is just as when a person takes away another's goat. The one who took the goat is perhaps a king or a king's minister, someone possessing much power. The owner of the goat is poor and powerless. Because of his lack of power, he can only with his palms placed together implore the other, Sire, please return the goat to me, or give me the price of the goat. And now we get the case of somebody who is developed in virtue, etc., and the simile in illustrating him or her. I read again. It is just as when a person steals another's goat, and the owner of the goat takes it back by force. Here, the person who steals the goat is poor and powerless, while the owner of the goat is perhaps a king or a king's minister, someone possessing much power. Because of their power, excuse me, they can detain and arrest the thief and take the goat back by force. This is the case of a person who has stolen another's goat, and the owner of the goat takes it back by force. The same principle again, the same basic act. A goat is being stolen. but the results are quite different depending on the situation of the thief and the owner. We get another simile for these two contextual variations. So the first simile is: it is just as when a person owes another person 5 coins and is arrested by the creditor. This is the case when the debtor is poor and powerless. Because he is poor and powerless, when he owes another person 5 coins, he will be arrested by the creditor for owing just 1 coin. 5 coins and 1 coin. There's some small little error here. Anyway, he has very little. That is the point. Now we get the other part of the simile. It is just as when a person owes another person 100 coins, yet is not arrested by the creditor, and would not be arrested by him even for owing 1,000 or 10,000 coins. This is the case when the debtor has property beyond measure and is extremely powerful, and because of that, despite owing another person 100 coins, is not arrested by the creditor, and would not be arrested by him even for owing 1,000 or 10,000 coins. Okay, now I see. So the point about the 1 coin above is just that even if he would just own 1 coin. Yeah, there's one another difference in sequence. I already mentioned that the distribution between text, explanation, and simile is different, but also the series of similes in the Pali version is different. The grain of salt is the first in both versions, but the Pali then continues with the depth of having some or many coins and then comes to the stolen goat. So the main point of this discourse is that the result of karma depends on context, and the same deed can have different consequences. And we have these 3 similes. Just as a grain of salt turns a glass of water salty, but not the river Ganges. Just as a poor thief of a goat is taken to task, but not the rich thief of a goat. And just as a poor debtor is arrested for owing little, but not a rich debtor even if he owes much. Yeah, I think this discourse very nicely throws into relief the dynamic aspect of karma in early Buddhism. Again, for all those of you who are not in deep jhana, if there's any comment or question, otherwise I move on to the next discourse. Robert says, if everything is connected, every effect must have a cause. Hence, karma just refers ethically qualifiable actions. One example given at the beginning was that a disease can be the effect of careless behavior. But since carelessness against oneself is not ethically effective, this is not karma, but still cause and effect. What I was trying to say is that the point of ethically qualifiable action is that this is the emphasis of the idea of karma in Buddhism, and carelessness is something that has to do with our intention. So it could to some extent be ethically qualified, I think. But in this discourse that I quoted before, careless behavior was set apart from karma in the sense of what I have done in the past. Careless behavior is something that I'm doing in the present. And I think it's very nice that you take that up, because there is sometimes a tendency, and I've come across that in in Asian context, if something happens, to just see it as karma and then not do anything about it anymore. And this can even happen in the case of getting sick or so, not giving proper care that could be done. And that is actually an instance of careless behavior, I think. And the result the sick person gets from such careless behavior cannot be entirely attributed to past karma. Oh, I must have done something in my past life and therefore now I'm sick. There might be some part of it, but some part is present karma, present careless behavior. And I think that's a nice point that you brought that up. And yeah, everything is in a way connected. Everything is causally interconnected, but there's always a room for us to decide. And so the moment I've just been to the dentist this morning, so the moment there is a problem with the teeth, it's my decision if I go to the dentist or not, or if I just accept it as my bad karma from the past. Fortunately I didn't, otherwise I would be sitting here. Yeah. There are more questions coming, I think. Andrew is typing, how does karma manifest itself later on? Is it pleasant or unpleasant feelings? Yeah, feelings is one way of how karma manifests. Yeah, definitely. But the way karma may manifest is also, as I mentioned from this Loṇakaphala-sutta, it is also that which influences the fact whether we are ugly or beautiful, long or short-lived, rich or poor. There's the whole, our whole setup, being and doing, is in a way a result of our past deeds. And there's a comment by Linda. Somehow I have the feeling that these similes give one the impression that it is wise to mindfully weigh the risks before acting. Certainly this can't be the intention. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't fully understand the point you're making, Linda. These similes give one the impression that it is wise to mindfully weigh the risks before acting. The way I understand the simile is not about weighing the risk, but just showing that showing that the result of an unwholesome deed depends on the context, on the overall situation. And the practical injunction that I would take from that is not to weigh the risks, but rather to make sure that as much as I possibly can, I am acting in the area of wholesomeness, so that even an occasional lapse that is unavoidable to happen unless I am an arahant will not really have such an effect. This is the way how I would practically interpret these similes. If I am like the river Ganges, then the little ounce of salt will not have such an effect. But if I'm a narrow little glass of water, like my glass of water here that I used to drink, then the salt will have quite an effect. Good. Yeah, we have 6 more minutes now. Yeah, maybe I just quickly go through. Oh no, there are more questions. Manfred, the idea one could delete all karma crops up frequently in certain meditation circles. Yeah. Yeah, there is, I mean, it is not entirely wrong that in meditation old karma comes up and manifests in some way. But only to the extent that this karma has led to certain tendencies in our mind, and it is not possible to work up our past karma one by one, because that would be a task without end. So we have our basic setup, our basic conditioning, which we have created ourselves in the past, our anusayas, underlying tendencies, etc. And when we are meditating, then these things crop up. The foolish things we have done even in this life manifest first of all in meditation, and we have to work through these, and sometimes one just has to be really patient. And after some time these wear out. But this is not one-to-one working through old karma, and that would actually be more a jhana idea. And yeah, and painful feeling, as thanks to the comment by, who was it? Let me just check again. I think it was Robert. Yeah, that we also have the problem of careless behavior, not only karma. Here's Robert with another comment. He says something about Andrew's comment. Are feelings not always the cause of some stimulus from the environment? Then can one say that karma always comes to us through the conditions that we are exposed to? This sets the stage for certain experiences in our life. Yeah, I just want to check. Andrew's not answering to that. I don't think that feelings are always the cause of some stimulus from the environment. Feelings can arise in relation to each of the sense doors, and the sense door of the mind, for example, is not necessarily dependent on the environment. So an experience of jhana that I have been so much talking about at the beginning of our lecture, I think we could say that there we have feelings that really arise independent of the environment. Precisely, in fact, the letting go of the environment helps us to experience those feelings. But it is certainly true that karma, that the conditions that we are exposed to is related to karma. As we had this other discourse, somebody who is born ugly, sick, and in a poor living condition, that is his or her karma working itself out in this way. This is not that they now have to accept this situation for the rest of their life and just be depressed about having such bad karma. It's just a starting position. But somebody in a poor, ugly, sickish condition can still make much out of their lives, just as somebody who is beautiful, rich, good to-do family can make all kind of nonsense and end up in a very bad condition. Then there is a comment by Andrew. He says, I think this sutta is very positive, that it teaches us not to passively surrender ourselves to past karma, but instead the sutta directs us to the way to wholesome behavior. Yeah, that is in fact the thing I also feel. And it was good that Linda made that comment that made me reflect on it again. But it really gives you this feeling that sometimes lapses are happening, and it's not the whole world is collapsing on us. It's just that one more spur on to do something wholesome, to put this foolish thing I did, as much as I can amend for it, I'll amend for it, but I put it into a context where there is so much water that it doesn't get so salty. Manfred, isn't every thought affecting a little change in our mental setup and therefore karmically active? We could put it like that. Yeah, karma is a constant thing happening. Every moment we take little decisions between alternatives. These alternatives are rather limited by our conditioning, by our situation, but still within that limiting area there is a choice we can take, and each of these choices strengthens our tendencies and changes our mental setup and therefore becomes karmically active. Andrew. I am also intrigued because different people also react differently to stimulus. Yeah, quite true. Some people have pleasant feelings and some may have unpleasant feelings from the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot about mental evaluation and how we react to things. There's a little beautiful story. I have 1 more minute. I just like to share that with you because Andrew's comment inspired me to that. As many years ago, I was in Nepal in a Tibetan monastery, and there was a Tibetan monk, and he was particularly noticeable for being not noticeable at all. You simply did not feel or notice his presence. And so nobody noticed him actually until somebody pointed it out to me. And the story was that he had been caught by the Chinese and been tortured for 20 years. They thought he knew something or what, I don't know the background. And they say after he's been released, he had just come to this monastery to spend his final years of his life. He was very thin and emaciated. And when asked by others about this 20 years, or I think it was 20 years, it was a very long time anyway, he said, he just quoted to have said just one thing, you know, it really improved my practice. I think I stop on that now. Thank you very much, and it was very nice, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Next week I'll not be there. There's a public holiday, so there is no lecture there, and so in 2 weeks' time we get into Madhyama-āgama number 12. Thank you and bye-bye.